And we are live. JT here. Welcome to the huddle. The huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you, whether you are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, or whether you're listening to the audio on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my friendly reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and get laser focused on the here and the now. And I guarantee you, you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will not only help you succeed at sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. I've been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. We had the opportunity to connect live and in person recently at Football Canada's Canada Cup in Edmonton. And again, I've been sort of following his journey over the last few years, and really just wanted to learn more about how did he get to where he is today. My guest in the huddle today is a Bishops and Western alum. He's currently serving as a customer support lead with GameStrat. My guest in the huddle today is Dimitri Pronko. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing great, thanks. Really appreciate you having me on today.
Definitely. And before we get kicked off, I just want to take a moment to count my blessings. I'm a firm believer that it's a daily practice. I do find the days where I'm most intentional and most consistent counting my blessings, that I find those days are filled with a little bit more love, a little bit more joy, a little bit more peace. And I'm a firm believer, biggest blessing you can give anyone, time and energy. So thank you again for blessing me with some of your time and energy, especially on a day where I know your time and energy is in demand, brother.
No, absolutely. Like I said, I'm just honored that you reached out to me, and then, like I said, thankful we're able to connect, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, I always like to remind people in the huddle, and, it's as much a reminder for myself, is that life is a game and games are supposed to be fun. So I'm curious, we all have these things that make us unique and different, right? And I had a coaching colleague that said, yeah, like it's our job to celebrate them. So I'm curious, what's an interesting fact about you that maybe a lot of people don't know about you that you'd be open to sharing with our community today?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I had to pick one, it's probably something I've gotten into post-career. And it's like woodworking and projects, working manually with my hands. I think, growing up, my father was always very handy, and we always did, whenever we could get something done on our own, we would. And I was always involved with it, whether I wanted to or not, I think back then. And but it taught me a lot of valuable lessons, and I learned to appreciate a lot of the work that we did and a lot of the renovations, whether it was building a deck or, adding, doing tile, hardwood flooring, honestly, whatever you can think of in terms of renovations. And I kind of just carried and got more into that actually post-career, in terms of just seeing different projects or needing certain things that I wanted either at my cottage or at the house, and being able to, rather than contract it out, learning it myself and building it from scratch. And yeah, just take a lot of appreciation for seeing kind of the fruits of your labor, and learning from that and learning different techniques, and definitely still very young in it, and obviously learning a lot, but yeah, it's something I enjoy a lot.
Awesome. And it's interesting, like as you were sharing there, what sort of came up was around this idea of like you love creating things, right? Like you said, there's something special when you get to see the fruits of your labor, right? When you take this idea from up here and then you get to actually see it physically manifest into, a final product. Is there anything particular that you've worked on in your, that you really like, oh, that was like a really special project?
Yeah, most recently, actually, this past summer, my partner and I, we've built an outhouse up at the cottage. So it was long overdue. The original outhouse, I think, had been there for 50 plus years and was built for a smaller version of a human than myself. So, I needed an upgrade, and like I said, was just long overdue. So we actually took the time and kind of, everything from the blueprints to the materials that we needed to, the process and how we were going to build it took about a week and a half. And
Okay.
yeah, kind of completed that project this summer. So that was a big one.
Awesome. I love that. Although I haven't had as much experience, working with my hands and the woodworking, I can appreciate, when we at our former house, building a fence, helping to build a deck. There is something special about seeing everything sort of come to be. So I get it.
Definitely.
Okay. You have had a very diverse path in sport, right? First, you were a high quality athlete, transitioned to becoming a high quality coach. And now, as I mentioned before, we kind of got on here that you've sort of blending this world of you're taking your lived experience as an athlete, as a coach, and now you're sort of integrating these tools that can help sort of make people better, right? Like sort of this idea of excellence, but then you're also tying in the innovation piece. So I'm curious, what is an important life lesson that you've gotten from sport and you still find yourself applying to your life today with the understanding that, yeah, there's lots of lessons that I'm sure that you've probably taken away from sport.
No, definitely. Another great question. I think one thing that probably sticks out to me the most is the ability to handle failure. I think failure is inevitable. Nobody grows without failure. You can't get better without failure. It's an essential and necessary part of the process, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're trying to accomplish. I don't think I know of anybody or I've heard of anybody who's tried to, commit to something or apply themselves in one way, shape, or form and have been great right off the start. So I think football almost overemphasizes that to a positive extent. You mess up a play, you don't have time to dwell on it. That's that next play mentality, like we also referenced in prior to hopping on here. But yeah, you just learn to deal with failure. You learn to deal with constructive criticism and being, criticized or called out in front of a team for a mistake that you made, and you learn to take that and then apply and learn from it, right? And realize that it's never really personal, but that it's all within the great scheme of working towards a common goal, whether it's individually or as a team. And so yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that sticks out the most to me.
Hmm. And I love kind of the feedback you gave there, right? Like the importance of being able to receive, right, that constructive feedback, right? And I think it's you sort of highlight that the importance of, right, like not take it personally. And what I found is again through a lot of reps and sets, right? A lot of those film meetings, a lot of on the field, you sort of learn this idea that by not taking things personally and being open to that feedback, that's actually someone like loving you tough, like someone actually saying that, hey, you can do better. And I guess my question to you is, as you've transitioned into the quote unquote real world, the business world,
Mhm.
do you find that those lessons happen a lot outside of sport? I'm kind of curious on your perspective.
Absolutely. And I think more so even with, working in a startup environment with a startup company, we'll be the first to acknowledge that we don't know it all. And we're in the process of learning it as we go along. And there are countless examples since I've been there, and I've only been there since 2020 now, where we're learning how to implement new processes or ways to do things more efficiently, or realizing that we were completely wrong in doing something one way, right? And so, absolutely, I think there's a huge application to it outside of sport. And I don't think it's necessarily restricted to the startup world. I think no matter what you do, and you start a new job, you're in a line of work that you've never done before, you're going to fail, and you're going to have to learn, and you're going to have to adapt, and that's the only way that you ultimately are going to move forward and grow and excel in whatever it is that you're trying to do.
It's interesting as you were sharing that, two words really jumped out, the importance of practicing patience, right? Because again, the process is filled with ebbs and flows, wins, losses, but as long as you keep moving forward, right? Like as long as you keep getting better day by day, rep by rep, things you'll generally trend in the right direction. And, also hearing you talk about this idea of like developing a thicker skin, right? Because it's interesting that I think sometimes in society, we have lost that ability to a degree of practicing patience with each other, like being open to diversity of thought, new thoughts, new ideas, but then also the ability to receive feedback and have a thick skin and realize that, it doesn't have to be personal, right? Just take things as feedback, right? As objective.
Yeah, and let's not kid ourselves. It's always going to be frustrating.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to be bad at something.
Yeah.
And especially when it's something new, you kind of feel silly. You feel like it's not something you should be doing. You don't. And the ego, I know, like I said, is a powerful thing, and it does want to override a lot of the processes and the mental steps that we're trying to take. And so, football, I find, as at least from a personal standpoint, has helped me by no means be perfect at it, but has enabled me to sometimes set that aside and realize, okay, I have to humble myself and understand, have some humility in this situation and be like, okay, it's okay if I'm not good at this. And it's okay to admit that I don't have the answer right now in this moment. But as
Yeah.
long as I'm willing to work hard and find the answer, and I'm not just sitting there complaining about the fact that I don't have the answer or that I failed at something,
Yeah.
you're always on the up and up, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm curious, I think one of the interesting things, like you talked about, like a fair number of high quality athletes, right? You transitioned to coaching, right? And you had an opportunity, right, to coach at Queens. And then, like you said, you had this opportunity to join a startup. I think the timelines, who would have thunk that you joining a startup was around the same time the earth got, the world kind of got hit on its kind of spun, and just an interesting time. What has that process been like for you over the last few years, transitioning away from, being actively involved in sport, but then also finding a way to bring new thoughts, new ideas to the table?
Yeah, I don't think it's been easy by any means. I think it's definitely tough when you're so used to doing something for so long. I mean, I started playing football at the age of 8, went all the
Mm-hmm.
way to, took it to as far as I could, which was, the end of my university career at 24. And then you're kind of in a position where everything comes to an end and you got to figure out what you're doing next, right? Some people are definitely more prepared for it than others. And I think I was kind of caught in a bit of a crossroads of not knowing where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, but knew that I always had a passion for sport, loved obviously the sport of football, and wanted to stay involved somehow. I had done a lot of coaching throughout my years as well in the summertime when I came back to Ottawa. I'm originally from Ottawa, so when I was coming back in the summertime, both when I was at CJEP and my summer while I was at Bishops, coached whenever I could locally, and then essentially knew that I was okay since I didn't really know where I was going or what I wanted to do to kind of dip my toes into the coaching world. And thankfully I was in a fortunate position again where our staff after the 2018 season, um, Coach Steve Snyder ended up getting a head coaching job at Queens. Coach Jay Brusacelli ended up getting the head coaching job at Windsor. And so there was opportunities there for me to kind of get a taste of what that coaching life would have been like or was like at the university level. So ultimately I opted, was thankful that both of them were willing to offer me kind of positions as an assistant at the time, and ultimately ended up going with Queens for the 2019 season, which was again a fantastic experience. Forever grateful for the coaches there and Coach Steve Snyder for even bringing me on board at the time, and did the 2019 season there, and then like you'd mentioned, the world kind of got spun on its head there at the end of right at the beginning of 2020, and so kind of put me back into a position where again I didn't know what I was going to do or where I was going to go. So I ended up relocating back to Ottawa, and kind of through connections and getting connected through the football community with old coaches, teammates, etc. I kind of got connected with the people at Tunch and Ben here at GameStrat, and kind of been here since.
Hmm. And it's interesting, right? How, we were talking offline about how all these experience, right? Like it's, I always like to remind people, and, often these reminders are things I need to hear myself, like this idea of every experience in your life up to this point is preparing you for something greater. And it's interesting how all your experiences have helped you become kind of the man you are today, and how they've prepared you for what you're doing now. So I'm curious, bringing in some of these new ideas, these new tools, has it been easy to get coaches and athletes used to these different tools. And I'll sort of preface it by the idea. I remember, I was sharing with you at the tournament there, one of our coaches said to you, like, our athletes like don't even know how to function without it now. So it's kind of like you really sort of solved, a problem, and you're helping them, and they, they almost cannot picture life without it. So yeah, what's sort of been the biggest lesson through there, trying to bring new ideas to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the technology is evolving the game and helping speed things up, right? I mean, I can remember I was fortunate again through my career where, at the start of my university career, this technology wasn't necessarily available. And towards the end of my career, it became available and we were implementing it, and I was able to use it, and I was able to use it both as a player, as a coach. Um, and I think what it allows you to do is you have that ability to make corrections, to see things more quickly. You can then, you're not stuck waiting till Sunday afternoon in order to make those corrections, or even the Monday during film session. You see them right away. You can make them, make that correction, and then you can go back onto the field and address it. So I think it's definitely speeding up the game, and you're seeing a bit of a crossroads between, I guess, the old generation of coaching and the new generation of coaching, where I get it. Definitely anything tech tends to scare a lot of people. It seems like the younger generation of coaching, at least, is more open to it, more willing to take a chance, and also I think understands the full scope of it in terms of what it can provide as a value to the game and how it can speed things up for them. Again, I think it's undeniable. From not having it to using it, and to using it both as a player and a coach, seeing the actual benefit of it, being able to identify whether it's fronts or certain, blitz packages, or how just people are adjusting to certain plays or certain calls. There's a really endless value in my opinion, and noticed a huge progression in even just from a player and a coaching standpoint, the learning curve. Right now, you're learning how to make adjustments on the fly, and it's not taking you a full week to make those adjustments and to learn that from those mistakes. You're able to do it right then and there immediately in the game, and then also try new things out to see if those things get corrected or not. So it definitely speeds things up, and I think it's interesting to see, like you had mentioned, a lot of people are now more and more reliant on it. Maybe to a fault in certain situations, right? I think there's definitely you don't necessarily want to be necessarily glued to it 24/7, but at the same time, I think it definitely provides a good amount of value.
Yeah. Well, I love it. As you're saying, like, it's perspective, right? It's like, what we were doing before was great, but I like how you sort of mentioned, like, there is value there in being able to speed up this process, right? Like being able to give people immediate feedback. And I guess I sort of wear my educator hat lens there, where we start to understand that the majority of, a fair number of learners are visual, right? That being able to provide, like, as I'm sure many high quality athletes, especially in football space, film doesn't lie, right? So being able to show, quick and immediate feedback, here's what we're doing, here's what we're seeing, right? There is value there in the ability to take that feedback and then apply it really quickly, right? So
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can recall countless times where, a coach is telling me something, how to adjust, how to not adjust, or tell me I'm doing something, or they're seeing something a certain way and I'm not recalling it properly. But then, as we always say, the film never lies. And so that's been a slogan that I know a coach, I think, once said way back, and it's kind of always stuck. And I think anybody who's played football will admit that the film never lies. And so for me to be able to see that film now immediately as soon as I come off the field, yeah, like I said, it's just speeds things up incredibly.
yeah. So I'm curious, like you said, there's been the U Sport level has adopted it, right? The PSO, the NSO has adopted it, right? Um, is there an opportunity, like, do you see, I guess, wearing, the high school coach lens, the OSFL, the community sport, like, do you think it's something that any coach could use as a great tool? Like, do you think there's an application? Would it have to be a simplified version? Kind of curious on what your take on that would be.
No, I definitely think it's applicable at most levels. Like I said, a big chunk of our market is the U.S. high school football market, and a lot of teams are getting a lot of good use out of it down there and down south. In terms of up here in Canada, at least, I think if there was more funding involved and there was more financial support for a lot of high school level programs, city ball programs, teams would have more, or would be more inclined, I think, to improve or take chances on things like tech and how to implement tech within their own programs, and understanding the value and what you get out of it by kind of pouring that funding into it. But I think that's where kind of a lot of the issue lies, at least up north here, is that, like I said, there's not a lot of financial support for a lot of these programs, I think, or they're dealing with very limited budgets. And as a result, they're kind of, I don't want to say getting stuck, but they are kind of limited, I guess, to a certain extent into what they can acquire, right? I mean, I know it adds up pretty quickly where you need new helmets, you need new jerseys, new equipment, tackling dummies, et cetera. Like those things would take precedent at this point in time, at least. So I think as the game continues to grow and as budgets continue to expand, I think it's definitely something that could definitely be implemented more at the lower levels, at least in Canada. But you're already seeing that change and that impact, at least at the high school level stateside.
Yeah. Well, it's great, right? And it's interesting. I'm curious to see, like you were mentioning, it's already being stateside there, and it's acknowledging the fact that a lot of high schools down south, they have more funding, right? They have bigger budgets, so they can, afford some different luxuries, right? But I even think back to my time when I started coaching in the early 2000s, right? Just how young people, the athletes, the coaches are so much like, film is so important. Like, I don't think I ever remember watching film until university, right? So it's interesting. I'm kind of curious to see where this thing goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was similar in that regard. Like, I don't think I watched film until I was fortunate enough that I had one coach who was almost ahead of his time back then, and was making us watch film at the midget level. But again, like that would have been my first taste of film, and it was, again, we're kind of limited again with resources and time, and time commitments for players, and so, but then ultimately transitioning into CEGEP before going to university, then film became an essential part of your day-to-day learning. I mean, it's our over. I don't know how much what the math would be on it, but it's a big chunk of the game. You're in that film room quite a bit, and you're learning a lot off of the film and the video.
Yeah. And the side benefit, you're developing that thicker skin because you're getting open to hearing constructive feedback.
Definitely.
So I'm curious, one of the pillars around, if I'm wearing my Football Ontario hat, is this idea around innovation, right? And excellence. And that's why I thought the timing of our conversation was really great, because depending on when people are listening to this, we're trying to really, get clear on what does excellence look like? What does the innovation piece look like? I'm curious, where do you see, from your perspective at GameStrat, what do you think is the next evolution of this tool? Like, in terms of, like, where do you see innovation sort of coming in and even enhancing the game and the experience more?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think you're kind of seeing it already I mean, there's a big emphasis on data and stats, and people want the feedback. Not only are we providing it, at least right now, from a filming perspective and a visual perspective, but people want the quantitative aspect of it too, I think. And so people want the numbers to back their decisions, or to almost confirm what they're seeing, right? And I think almost that's maybe the next progression, of the next evolution, is people relying so heavily on the statistics of the game, or the data points, whether it's tracking, players' movements and heart rates, and how certain plays function and the percentages of that. And I mean, I know we're tracking a lot of that stuff already manually, and there is some tracking to a certain extent, but I think just improvements in that area, and time is of the essence, right? So people want it immediately. So if there's ways that you can incorporate that, where a play is done and you're getting a bunch of, not just data, because I think a lot of people think data, and it's a lot of times people don't know how to read data, or it's just so much information that they think they need all this information, and realize that it's too much for them to even consume or get enough out of it. But it's going to be a crossroads of quantifying that data, but then also packaging it in a way where it's consumable by the end user, and then figuring out how it's beneficial, and if there's maybe a standard or a uniform set of data points that people are going to heavily rely on and benefit from.
Interesting as you're sharing. What I heard is Coach Pretoria, I remember saying when we were doing junior standings, I remember him asking, our varsity players at the time, how many people here watch film? All these hands come up. Hey, how many do you think know how to watch film? And his hands up. He's like, whatever. Like, you know, again, a lot of it was just training them how to actually like take, you know, watch the feedback and be able to learn from it, right? And I do
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
you sort of offer an interesting idea, because I think back to some of the decisions in coaching where, you know, it's great if you're a coach that's willing to watch film, right? To break things down, you know, to break things down into data. But be interesting if that data was able to be collected quicker, right? In real time, because you could then start to see what are the trends, right? And then a lot of that is really in football, especially, is learning how to sort of respond to certain behaviors, right? Like, okay, second and 5, they're probably going to run one of these two things, right? So,
Yep.
no, I like the idea of the data piece.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm curious on this. You know, as you are sort of coming into this world and sort of being at the cutting edge, has there been a moment for you where you've really thought, oh, like this is why I had to sort of take the proverbial leap of faith to sort of leave the safe and comfortable world of like, you know, coaching and kind of go into the sort of startup world? Like, was there a moment where you're like, oh, this is pretty awesome?
Yeah, I think from a personal standpoint, I've always been, I know I wanted to stay connected to sport.
Yeah.
I knew that, I had worked 9 to 5s in the past, and I knew that it um, wasn't an ideal fit for me personally.
Mhm.
So trying to find something, and again, I did a BA in kinesiology was what I graduated with. So, finding something in that realm, you toy around with a lot of, okay, coaching is a big mainstream. Um, but it again, you're not really sure, right? And so for me, it was honestly just I'm fortunate that the opportunity came up and I was willing to take a chance. And I knew that it was almost a bonus that it was within the sports world, that it was, being run by a bunch of, ex-youth sports players who had had similar experiences that I did, had played at the same level that I did. And so knowing that the culture would probably be something that I was familiar with,
Mhm.
going into it. And so those were all things that were appealing to me. And knowing that I had an opportunity to contribute at the ground level, to help build this company, to help contribute to the building out of processes, to implement different ideas. I was just, like I said, extremely fortunate for the opportunity that I was willing to take a chance on it.
Mhm. So it sounds like for you, it was really, like you said, being open to the next opportunity, right? But then also finding yourself, like with you know, start up a business that sort of like the core values were kind of the same, right? Like they were from similar lived experience. So it sounds like, you know, you found that. How important has that been for you aligning yourself professionally with, you know, something that is has similar core values?
I think it's crucial. I think and we say it all the time when we're hiring, and we want to make sure that we're very transparent with everybody that like it, as much as this has to be a fit for us, it has to be a fit for you.
Mhm.
I think if you're not enjoying the people that you're working with, or that you're collaborating with a project on, and you see it in football, I was fortunate that throughout my career, I've been a part of successful teams. I've been a part of not so successful teams.
Mhm.
And one of the big differences is the camaraderie and how tight knit are those people that you're actually going to war with.
Mhm.
How close of a relationship do you have with the people that you're spending all those extra hours with, and that you're pouring all this energy and effort into? Um, and so I think it's a crucial part in terms of, I think, for anybody, and that doesn't necessarily go for just the startup world. I think that goes for when you're looking for a 9 to 5 job, or when you're looking for any line of work for that matter.
Mhm.
Finding a place where you genuinely enjoy being around the people, knowing that you're not going to necessarily enjoy every aspect of that job, because I think that
Mhm.
that's very, very difficult to find. Some people are fortunate enough to do it, but not everybody does.
Mhm.
Um, but knowing that, like, again, like, if you're all going through similar, and you're willing to, the grind, it's a cliche word, but grind it out essentially with the people that you're surrounded with, and you enjoy, again, going to work with them, going to battle with them, creating ideas with them, generating whatever the case is. I think it's something that everybody should be looking for, honestly, as they transition, at least from the world of sport to the real world.
Mhm. And I love that. Again, what I really heard from you again was this idea of, you know, whether we're talking football, whether we're talking about, our relationships, whether we're talking about our business life, the importance of surrounding yourself with a strong and powerful team, right? And I think one of those hallmarks, like you said, I've been blessed to be on some great teams, some not so great teams, but really it's that mutual connection that you want to see the person to your right or to your left succeed more, even than probably they want to, right? And it's just kind of sort of, that quote by JFK, like, rising tides lift all boats, right? That idea.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, there's going to be pain points and there's going to be struggle and there's going to be disagreement. And I think what we've got going, at least with the company that I'm at now at GameStrat, it's I think we're all on the same page about that. But we also try to remind ourselves like, okay, we're all working towards the same thing. We're all trying to accomplish the same thing. So it's like it's okay to have those things and we're having constructive conversation and we're going to work through things. And but there is that awareness piece, at least from everybody at the company, that there's going to be struggle and we're going to figure things out as we go, and there's going to be learning and we don't know everything, like that humility piece that we talked about earlier, right? Like we will all admit that we don't know everything, but that we're constantly learning every day and just doing our best, and that's ultimately all we can ask for.
So it sounds like, again, part of it, and it's sort of embedded within kind of what you guys are about, what you're doing now, is like that idea of being open to diversity of thought, right? And again, like you said earlier, it's not taking things personally and just, hey, we can agree to disagree and that's okay, but that's how you make things, bigger, better, faster.
Yep. No, that's exactly it. I think you go further together. I think it'd be nice, and I've been caught in that train of thought where you have like that individualistic mindset, and you kind of want to. I'm just going to do it on my own, and the reality is you can only get so far, and you need to rely on other people, and your other people can leverage each other's strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately that's what allows you to kind of go as far as you can take it.
I think that's a simple reminder. Again, we all have unique gifts, talents, and abilities. Just surround yourself with people that complement you.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm curious, like you were sharing a few minutes ago, you talked about this idea that many of you have that lived experience as, former high quality athletes, youth sport athletes. How important has it been to foster these strong relationships, to really like love on people? Like, how important has that been for you as you've seen the business grow?
Like, are you talking, sorry, just from a personal standpoint, like from my transition from sport into the real world, or?
I guess looking at in terms of helping and serving like your clients.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think for me, like having the advantage of being a user, both from a player and coaching standpoint, I can put myself in their shoes and I fully understand what they're going through on a game day when things may not be working or they are reliant on the technology and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it's not working the way it's supposed to be. And so I think from a customer support standpoint or customer success standpoint, it allows me to empathize with the customer a little more, and I understand absolutely how important it is for them to get it back up and running. But also providing that level of quality service, that knowing that like if they're stressed, I can't be stressed as well, because that doesn't you can't fight fire with fire essentially. And so you ultimately have to counter that. And I think it's a good, by no means am I perfect at it, but you're always learning and getting better at it. But I think it's helped tremendously in terms of just being able to relate to the customer, being a user myself. It's allowed me to progress and succeed, at least at the level that I'm at.
And I love that. As you were sharing, when you were first sharing your experience, again, sort of being able to walk a mile and that person choose to stand in their shoes. You talked about the power of empathy, right? Like you have an understanding because you've been there, you've done that, right? And how powerful it is. So I'm curious, like that ability to empathize and understanding, how important do you feel that is, even just in the game of life? Because I find like, I think that's sometimes what we struggle with, all of us from time to time, is that ability to empathize with people, to truly understand where they're coming from. I'm kind of curious your perspective on that.
No, I'd agree with you. I mean, I think it's something that I myself struggle with from time to time, and it's tough. I think it's extremely important. I think it's something that should be emphasized and even prioritized a little more. I do believe that if people just took the time, there's a quote in our office actually that we were all asked at one point to bring in a quote, and the one that I ended up choosing is "Seek first, understand, then to be understood." And to me, that I think there needs to be more of that, right? I think a lot of people want to just have their point be taken as fact and not want to listen, especially in a world where it seems like everyone is becoming increasingly more divided. Um, I think there lacks that ability to just hear somebody out and to acknowledge that it's okay. We don't come from the same background, or we're not going to necessarily agree with the same, train of thought or the same concept. And and we can be okay with that, right? Like we can agree to disagree almost. It seems like one or the other, you have to pick and choose. There can't be that middle ground anymore where you're kind of indecisive as to what you have to be on a side. And to me, I think there's too much of pick a side rather than just be like, I can just respect you for believing and thinking the way you think, and you can respect me for thinking the way I want to think. So to your point of how important is it, I think it's extremely um, crucial for relationships as a whole to be empathetic towards other people, other people's situations, other people's train of thought, and kind of the list goes on, really.
Mm. And I love that simple reminder, right? Like just imagine what we could do in this world, right? If we all practice again, a little more patience, a little more understanding with each other, and just just sort of remind ourselves, hey, everyone's doing the best they can. We can agree to disagree. I think it would be a lot more unifying, right? Whereas opposed to,
Yep.
we're sort of led to believe that we have to focus on, what separates us.
Yeah, and I think there's a saying I remind myself of often, and it goes to either when I do something or when I think of somebody else doing something, and it's and apologies for not knowing the author, but it's you do the best with what you know, and when you know better, you do better. And so for me, that's just if you're doing that and you're, whether we agreed on something, I felt wronged or disrespected, whatever it was, as long as I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you were doing the best you knew with what you knew. And when you know better, hopefully you do better. And I try to apply that to my life. I try to do the best with what I know. And again, once you know better, you just try and do better.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So I'm curious, one of the things that's really evident is you can tell that you're someone who is very self-reflective, right? Like you take feedback, right? And you think about, like how you said, if you know better, you can do better. So I'm curious, what words of wisdom would you offer a younger version of yourself? Maybe it was at a point where, they were experiencing a lot of, challenges, obstacles, adversity. What is a piece of wisdom you would share with your younger self that would really, you think, help sort of just ease the transition to better?
Yeah, I think something that I've probably struggled with at different parts of my life is that whatever it's a challenge you're taking on, it's a transition into a new phase of life. It's a big decision you're reflecting on. I think it's easy to get caught up, and the analogy of staring at the mountain and realizing like, wow, like the peak is so far away. Like I can't even imagine myself getting to there. And then just realizing that if you just look down, you can see your feet and you can see what your next step is. And so almost, seeing the peak, having the peak in mind, but also realizing that like if you keep focusing on the peak, you're going to lose track of the steps that you need to take. And so always reminding yourself and kind of looking down at your feet to know, just do one step at a time. And it's that inch by inch analogy, right? That's what it is. It's one step at a time that compounds itself time and time again. That eventually, before you know it, you'll look up and you're going to be at that peak, or you're going to have made that decision that you wanted to make, or you would have made that transition you would have taken that risk, whatever the case is.
I love that share, and I appreciate the simplicity of that, right? Like take one step forward. And why it actually resonates with me is when I was transitioning away from sport and coaching, right? I took a 2.5 year break from sport, and I took up running as just a way to sort of fuel that athlete and coach fire. And I remember running, and I was in a half marathon, and I remember hitting the proverbial wall that they often talk about. And I just remember hearing all this kind of interesting chatter, we'll say, all this trying to get me to stop. And I remember just saying to myself, one step at a time, right, left, right, left. And as soon as I sort of did that for a few paces, it was interesting how sort of like the seriousness of it kind of faded away. And it just allowed me to, I just remember being flooded with emotions, and it just allowed me to just enjoy the process more. So it really resonated with me what you said, because I've seen, like, when you remind yourself, take one step at a time, life tends a way of just working out.
It really does. And I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed by, looking further ahead or down the road without even, and like I said, you almost forget what the next step is. And so I think if there was one piece of advice, that's what it would be. It would just be to remind yourself of, what is your next step.
Yeah, absolutely. So, brother, I want to be respectful of your time and energy. If anyone has, piqued their interest, they want to learn more about GameStrat and what it's helping to grow and how it can best support the game. Is there a way people can learn more? Is there a way that they can follow? Yeah, what would be the best way for people to connect?
Yeah, I mean, reaching out to me, directly. I mean, always more information on our website, just
Mhm.
www.gamestrat.com. But if anybody was curious about, questions about either the company itself, my journey, anybody else's journey in the company, by all means. I mean, we're all pretty open and love to talk. So, have them reach out to me. If they reach out to you directly, have them, get them in contact with me. I'd be more than happy to sit down with them or even schedule a call. But that would be probably the best way.
Okay. Well, thank you, brother, and I'll be happy to share out each of those channels in the description, either on the podcast or on YouTube or on Facebook. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you, Dimitri. I want to acknowledge you for the great man you are, right? The great, I would even say teacher, coach, mentor, but again, and I say that as just someone who's been there, done that, and just more importantly, for the amazing human being you are. The one thing I've really taken away from this conversation is just the ability to take one action, right? One focused step in the right direction, right? And I think when you really break things down to taking that one focused action in the moment, that it typically has a way of just focusing you on the road ahead. So I just want to thank you for providing me that simple reminder today.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, would like to commend you as well for some of the work that you're doing. And I know, like I said, was honored to be a part of the podcast, and you've had a long list of great people, some people that, some of my mentors and friends and colleagues and teammates. So again, just appreciate everything that you're doing and spreading the word about success. And again, ultimately how it's leaving clues for everybody else to follow along.
Absolutely. So, folks, Dimitri dropped so many valuable nuggets of wisdom. But as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, knowledge is potential power. It's a consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually creates great results. So my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. And my only ask from these conversations is, if it resonated with you, if it touched your heart, then please share it with a friend, a loved one, a teammate, just someone you feel that would benefit from listening to these positive, inspiring, and empowering ideas. The more people we have listening, understanding, and applying these simple principles to their life, the more blessed this world will be. As always, love having these conversations with you in the huddle. Have a blessed rest of your day.